Pa never understood, always said I was weak, not like Bjorn. Elias traced a crack in the faded photograph of his brother. But I'll show him. I'll show them all. He tossed the photo onto the cluttered workbench. The wrench in his hand slipped, scraping against the rusting tractor engine. Elias, the bank, they sent another letter. Astrid's voice trembled slightly. She held out the crumpled envelope, her fingers stained with soil. Just another scare tactic, Astrid. He wiped his greasy hands on a rag, avoiding her eyes. It's not a tactic, Elias. We're behind on the payments. Freyja needs that medicine. We need food on the table. From inside the small farmhouse, a faint cough echoed. Freya.Kondo. Always Freya. Elias's jaw tightened. I said I'll handle it. Astrid stepped closer, her worn boots scuffing the concrete floor of the barn. How, Elias? How will you handle it? It's always the same. I handle it, but nothing changes. He spun around, throwing the wrench into his toolbox. The metal clanged loudly. I said I'll handle it. He grabbed his jacket, the worn denim stiffened cold, and stormed out of the barn, leaving Astrid standing alone in the dust-filled silence. The drive to Bjorn's estate was short, but every turn of the wheels felt like an eternity. Elias's beat-up truck rattled past fields of golden wheat, Bjorn's fields, thriving and abundant. His own land, just across the road, remained stubbornly barren, a stark reminder of his failures. He pulled up to Bjorn's grand farmhouse, the newly paved driveway gleaming. A sleek Mercedes sat parked near the entrance, a symbol of his brother's success. Elias swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry. Bjorn opened the door, impeccably dressed in a crisp white shirt. Elias, what a prize. The tone was polite, but Elias detected a hint of amusement, a condescending smirk playing on his brother's lips. I need to talk to you. Elias shifted his weight, feeling the dirt caked under his fingernails. Come in, come in. Bjorn gestured him inside. The house was pristine, filled with expensive furniture and artwork. Elias felt like an intruder, his worn clothes and calloused hands out of place in this world of polished surfaces and effortless well. I need a loan. The words tasted like ash in his mouth. Bjorn let out a soft chuckle, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal glass. A loan? What for? Another failed crop. Elias flinched. Free her. She's sick. Needs medicine. Expensive medicine. Ah, yes, the little one. Bjorn's eyes flickered with something Elias couldn't quite decipher. Pity? Disdain? Pa always said you weren't cut out for this life, Elias. Not like me. This isn't about Pa. Elias clenched his fists, his knuckles white against the rough denim of his jeans. Isn't it? Bjorn took a slow sip of his drink, never offering Elias one. He always said you were weak, relied on handouts, couldn't stand on your own 2 feet. Elias's vision blurred. Rage, hot and blinding, pulsed through him. He saw the antique clock on the mantelpiece, its gold face gleaming in the lamplight. He saw the open door of Bjorn's study, the stacks of cash visible inside the half-open safe. An idea, desperate and dangerous, began to form in his mind. Under the cloak of night, Elias returned to Bjorn's estate. He slipped through an unlocked window, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The cool night air did little to soothe the burning shame that rose in his chest. He crept through the silent house, the unfamiliar opulence, a constant reminder of the gulf that separated him from his brother. He found the clock, its smooth surface cold beneath his trembling fingers. He found the safe, the thick wads of cash, a tantalizing promise of relief. He grabbed both, his hands shaking, and slipped back out into the night. He found Martha, his elderly neighbor, on her porch swing, a cigarette glowing faintly in the darkness. Can't sleep? She asked, her voice raspy. He shook his head, the weight of the clock and cash heavy in his pockets. Secrets have a weight, Elias. Martha exhaled a plume of smoke. They pull you down. He stared out at the darkness, her words echoing in the silence. Back home, the money felt like a lead weight in his pocket. He looked at Freya, sleeping peacefully in her small bed, her face pale but serene. Astrid sat beside her, holding her small hand. Where were you? Astrid's voice was flat, devoid of emotion. Just taking care of things. Elias averted his gaze, unable to meet her eyes. Sleep offered no escape. Guilt gnawed at him, a relentless reminder of his betrayal. He tossed and turned, the weight of his lies pressing down on him. Days blurred into a week. A man named Lars arrived at Elias's farm, a slick, charismatic businessman with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He spoke of lucrative investments, of doubling Elias's money in a week. "A sure thing," Lars assured him, flashing a gold watch. Elias, desperate to replace the stolen money, desperate to erase his transgression, agreed. He handed over the cash, his gut twisting with unease. A week passed. Lars vanished. The money vanished. Elias had nothing. He returned home to find Astrid packing a suitcase. Freya sat on the bed, clutching a ragged doll, her eyes wide and questioning. "I know about the money, Elias." Astrid's voice trembled. "I know about Bjorn. I know about Lars." Elias opened his mouth to speak, but the words caught in his throat, a choked whisper lost in the heavy silence of the room. "I can't do this anymore, Elias." Astrid zipped the suitcase shut, the sharp click echoing the finality of her decision. "I'm taking Freya. We're leaving." "I can't do this anymore, Elias." Astrid zipped the suitcase shut, the sharp click echoing the finality of her decision. "I'm taking Freya. We're leaving." Elias watched them go, the old truck kicking up dust as it disappeared down the long dirt road. He was alone. Truly alone. He found himself at the local tavern, the dimly lit space filled with the murmur of hushed conversations and the clinking of glasses. He sat at the bar, nursing a drink, the amber liquid doing little to numb the ache in his chest. Whispers followed him, like shadows clinging to his heels. "That's Elias. The one who stole from his own brother. Heard his wife left him, took the kid. Served him right, never could handle his own." He slammed his glass down, the sudden noise silencing the whispers. He met the eyes of the men who had been talking, their faces a mixture of fear and disdain. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He stood up, his chair scraping against the wooden floor, and walked out, the whispers starting up again as soon as the door closed behind him. He stumbled through the town, the familiar streets now hostile territory. He saw the judgment in the eyes of the people he passed, the averted gazes, the quickened step. He was a pariah, an outcast in the town he had called home his entire life. He found himself at Martha's garden gate, the scent of lavender and rosemary filling the air. He pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest. Martha sat on her porch, a book in her lap. She looked up, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Elias," she said, her voice gentle. "Come sit." He sat down heavily on the steps, the weight of his shame crushing him. "It's bad, isn't it?" he mumbled, his voice thick with despair. Martha nodded. "It is, but it's not the end, Elias." He looked up, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "What do you mean?" "You made mistakes, Elias, big ones. But you can still fix them." Martha leaned forward, her gaze steady. "You need to face the truth, Elias. Face what you've done. And then you need to start making things right." He spent the next few days in a haze of self-pity and regret. He drank too much, slept too little, and worked not at all. His farm, once his pride and joy, now stood neglected, a testament to his failings. He was a shadow of his former self, a hollow shell haunted by the ghosts of his mistakes. One morning, he woke up with a pounding headache and a churning stomach. He looked around his empty house, the silence deafening. He knew what he had to do. He found Astrid at her sister's house, a small cottage on the outskirts of town. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding in his chest. Astrid opened the door, her eyes red-rimmed, her face pale. "Elias," she said, her voice a whisper. "Astrid, I—" He stopped, the words catching in his throat. "I need to talk to you." She stepped aside, allowing him to enter. Freya was playing on the floor, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Papa," she cried, running towards him. He knelt down, embracing her tightly. "Freya," he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. Astrid watched them, her expression unreadable. "Astrid, I know I messed up. I messed up bad." Elias looked up at her, his eyes pleading. "I was wrong. I was so wrong. I let my pride get in the way. I let past words get in my head. I was so afraid of failing that I ended up failing everyone." He took a deep breath. "I stole from Bjorn. I lied to you. I trusted Lars. I made so many mistakes." "I know," Astrid said, her voice soft. "I want to make things right, Astrid. I want to fix things. I want you and Freya back. Astrid's eyes filled with tears. It's not that easy, Elias. I know, but I'm willing to try. I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Astrid didn't reply. She just looked at him, her gaze searching his face. He left Astrid's sister's house with a glimmer of hope. He knew the road to redemption would be long and arduous, but he was determined to take it. He went to Bjorn's estate, the grand house looming before him like a fortress. He knocked on the door, his hand trembling. Bjorn opened the door, his expression surprised. Elias, he said, his voice cautious. Bjorn, I need to talk to you. Bjorn stepped aside, allowing him to enter. They sat in the opulent living room, the silence heavy between them. I'm here to confess, Elias said, his voice barely above a whisper. I stole from you. The clock, the money. Bjorn's face hardened. I know. I'm sorry, Bjorn. I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do. Desperate, or just weak? Bjorn's voice dripped with disdain. Maybe both, Elias admitted. But I'm not that man anymore. I'm trying to change. He pulled out a wad of cash, the money he'd earned from selling his remaining livestock. This is all I have right now, but I'll pay you back every cent, and I'll find a way to replace the clock. Bjorn stared at the money, his expression unreadable. Then, he sighed. It's not about the money, Elias. Elias looked up, surprised. It's about trust, Bjorn continued. About family. We're brothers, Elias. We should be there for each other, not stealing from each other. I know, Elias said, his voice thick with emotion. I messed up bad, but I want to fix things. I want us to be brothers again. Bjorn looked at him for a long moment, his gaze searching Elias's face. Then, a flicker of something that might have been compassion crossed his features. It's going to take time, Elias, he said, his voice softer now. But maybe we can fix this. Elias left Bjorn's estate with a renewed sense of hope. He had taken the first steps towards redemption. He had faced the truth, confessed his sins, and begun to make amends. The road ahead would be difficult, but he was no longer alone. He had the support of Martha, the possibility of reconciliation with Astrid, and the faint glimmer of a renewed brotherhood with Bjorn. He returned to his farm, the neglected fields a stark reminder of the work that lay ahead. He picked up a hoe, his calloused hands gripping the familiar tool. He started to work, the sweat dripping from his brow, the sun beating down on his back. He worked until the sun set, his muscles aching, his body exhausted. But his spirit was lighter than it had been in weeks. He was no longer running from his past. He was facing it, head on. News of Freya's worsening condition reached Elias, like a punch to the gut. He rushed to Astrid's sister's house, his heart pounding in his chest. He found Astrid sitting by Freya's bedside, her face etched with worry. She's not getting any better, Astrid said, her voice trembling. The doctor says she needs specialized treatment, expensive treatment. Elias felt a wave of despair wash over him. He had lost his money, his farm was failing, and now his daughter was fighting for her life. He had nothing left to offer. There has to be something we can do, he said, his voice desperate. There is, Astrid said, her gaze meeting his. We can ask for help. Elias hesitated. Asking for help went against everything he had ever believed in. But he knew Astrid was right. He couldn't do this alone. With Martha's encouragement, he organized a town meeting. He stood before the townspeople, his heart pounding in his chest. He confessed his mistakes, his voice raw with emotion. He told them about Freya, about her illness, about their desperate need for help. He expected anger, judgment, scorn. Instead, he saw compassion in the eyes of his neighbors. He saw understanding. He saw hope. Martha stepped forward, her voice clear and strong. I'm donating my life savings to Freya's medical fund, she announced. Who else will join me? One by one, the townspeople stepped forward, offering what they could. Farmers donated produce, merchants donated goods, families donated money. The community rallied around Elias and his family, their generosity overwhelming. Lars, sensing the shift in the town's attitude towards Elias, showed up at the farm, his smile as slick as ever. I hear you're doing well, Elias, Lars said, his eyes glinting with greed. I want my cut. Elias stood tall, his gaze unwavering. You won't get a penny, Lars. You preyed on my desperation. You lied to me. You stole from me. You're nothing but a con man. Lars's smile faltered. You regret this, Elias. Bjorn stepped forward, his presence a surprise to everyone. "Leave him alone, Lars," Bjorn said, his voice firm. "Elias made mistakes, but he's trying to make things right. You, on the other hand, are nothing but a parasite." The townspeople, emboldened by Bjorn's words, turned on Lars, their voices rising in a chorus of anger. Lars, realizing he was outnumbered and outmatched, retreated, his threats fading into the distance. Elias watched him go, a sense of triumph washing over him. He had faced his demons, both internal and external. He had confessed his sins, made amends, and found forgiveness. He had learned the true meaning of community, the power of vulnerability, and the importance of asking for help. Freya's condition began to improve, her smile returning to her face, her laughter filling the air once more. Astrid and Elias, having weathered the storm together, found their way back to each other, their love rekindled by shared hardship and newfound understanding. Elias worked tirelessly to rebuild his farm, his hands calloused but his heart filled with gratitude. He no longer sought validation from his father's ghost, or from the whispers of the town. He found fulfillment in his work, in his family, and in his community. He stood in his fields, the setting sun casting a warm glow on his face. Astrid and Freya were beside him, their hands clasped in his. He looked out at the land, the golden wheat swaying in a gentle breeze, a symbol of his resilience, his redemption, and his newfound hope. He was no longer living in the shadow of his brother, or in the shadow of his father's expectations. He was Elias, a man who had fallen but had risen again, stronger and wiser for the experience. He was a man who had learned that true strength lies not in self-reliance, but in the courage to ask for help, the humility to admit mistakes, and the grace to forgive and be forgiven. He was a man who had finally found his place in the world, not as the prodigal son, but as a man who had found his way home.